Greetings everybody, my name's Pieta Valentine. I've written 2 books, The Resident's Voice and The Resident's Rise, both from a dementia unit. Now, the session today is on residents explaining what they have to tolerate most in a dementia unit. When I asked the residents what was the main thing that they had to tolerate, it was actually quite a surprise. It wasn't the answer I was expecting. And this, I must say, I asked when the residents were in the workshop, so they were not experiencing the dementia stress and anxiety, spins and blanks. And it was just the central core group. They were settled, focused, and I said to them, what is the main thing that you have to tolerate in a dementia unit? And the overriding answer was noise. The background, unremitting, constant noise of a dementia unit is what stresses them the most, or they say is what they have to tolerate the most. And I didn't really expect this to be the answer, but once I sort of looked into it, I could see what they were saying, because as staff, you're only having to cope with the noise 8 hours a day on your shift, and then you get the weekend's break. And even then, as a staff member working in a dementia unit, it's very noisy. There's constant layering of noise. For example, the medication trolley, that's noisy. Rattling around, that's 3 times a day for 1 hour each round. And then often the medication trolley, the nurse will have the medication trolley only about, 1 or 2 feet behind the shoulders of the resident that's sitting there. So all the noise of, encouraging someone to take their medication, which, can be quite a feat sometimes, all that wrangling can just go on, right at the shoulder of the person wanting to watch Netflix or whatever. So they can't hear it. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is there's the constant ringing of phones all day by relatives and others wanting the charge nurse. Then there's visitors at the nurse's desk, often, wanting a lengthy conversation with the nurse at the nurse's desk, often speaking up and loudly because the nurse can't hear them because there's so much noise going on in the unit. So that adds another higher layer. And then, of course, there's the screamers, the residents that scream, sometimes all day. If they're really stressed, anxious, angry, often the residents that are unsupported by relatives, and, they can just unprovoked scream out. There's not really a reason to it because, they're cared, everyone at the dementia units are cared for well. They have their meals, showered, dressing, at least where I have worked. So the screaming is because of some internal stress rather than external triggers, 90% of the time. And, the screaming can be very sharp, very loud, and it can come as a shock if you're just sort of sitting there quietly, not expecting anything, and then someone very close to your ear starts screaming out. It's like, it really sort of sabotages the system. I don't actually know how residents don't get tinnitus and other hearing related injuries, and tension neck and all the rest of it, because the noise is severe. And the thing is, they don't get any respite. Very rarely is a dementia unit quiet, maybe after 8 o'clock at night when most of the residents have gone to bed. But other than that, most of the time, a dementia unit is noisy. Now, as a relative visiting, you may not notice it that much because, you're there maximum of an hour. So you can it's like going to a shopping mall. You can cope with that for an hour, but if you lived in a shopping mall, it would be a different story. So living in shopping mall type noise and stimulation as a dementia unit is, there's a lot going on in the dementia unit, people coming and going, and doctors rounds and visitors and activities, and it's not a peaceful little lounge like when you sit at home watching TV with the cat and hardly anyone visits all throughout the week. It's a completely different environment. So it's really hard on the residents having to cope with this noise, because this is the central core group that I used to work with. They're trying to focus, they're trying to concentrate, they're trying to get away from the, mind spin and the memory problems, and focus their intellect and concentrate on, the topic at hand, whether that's, whatever topic the workshop's about, or the karaoke even, or the Netflix series. I mean, that whatever is happening at the time, they're trying to get to grips with, to enjoy, to stimulate their thinking, and to be able to get their thinking on track. And if they're disturbed by the noise, not only does it disrupt their concentration, which is a real shame, but it also heightens their stress response, which makes it harder to settle and then focus again. And another thing is, it takes a long time sometimes to get this concentration going. It's not like an automatic thing. I mean, interest has to be garnered, focus and concentration has to be retained enough for the topic at least to be absorbed into the intellect, so that they know what it is they're meant to be thinking about, and then to try and grasp that and hold on to that and keep thinking that through, at least to get 1 or 2 points from the topic of the conversation or discussion. So that takes time and effort. And so when they're sort of in the midst of that and enjoying it and really getting something from it, and then someone starts screaming and unrelenting scream, it's really distressing, because even though the nurse may well distract them, come running down the corridor and distract them, but then once they have to go back again to do the medications up the corridor, or the carers need to do the cares, the person just starts up again. So, it's really hard to know what to do. I mean, sometimes the residents will call out and say, stop shouting, but that only stresses them out more, because it has no effect on the person. So in terms of what you can do about this as a relative, I think it really needs to be considered. Hearing aids need to be considered as to whether the person has them or not. I mean, if they have them all day, then they're just, that noise is just magnified with the hearing aids, and the hearing aids are just helping them hear the din, basically, and it stresses them out. Whereas without the hearing aids, at least they don't, it's only half the din if they're half deaf. So sometimes having the hearing aids out is a blessing, actually. The hearing aids are good, of course, when the person has visits and the relative wants their loved one, to be able to hear them. But you can go onto the veranda or to the person's room where it's quiet and have that conversation, or indeed when you go out to have the hearing aids then for the residents, so that they can go outside and have a discussion with you, and it's not as likely that, hopefully, that there's not going to be a racket outside. So I think this whole aspect of hearing aids really needs to be considered carefully in terms of the things I've been saying here. And I noticed that actually there's only really one resident who really wanted her hearing aids with the work that I did. She was articulate, intelligent, she was a reader, and she had profound hearing loss. Even with her hearing aids though, she could hardly hear. It didn't make much difference, but she did like them in. And it made a little bit of a difference, but you actually had to practically shout to be heard, which was a stress for all parties. But most residents communicating with each other, they're only, a metre or so from each other, they hear each other fine, and they don't seem to want a hearing aid when they're in the unit itself. So please consider all those aspects in terms of the stress of noise and your relative. So in the unit, I'll just leave the link below for the 2 books. We're nearing the end. Thank you for all your likes, and thank you for supporting. Please subscribe. I really appreciate this, to be able to get the word out, the residents' word out, and their wonderful voice and all their wonderful experiences, to be able to share them, with the public at large. Thank you.